Oh my gosh, that is gorgeous. That is Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach himself doing Ashes Heil, a woman of valor. That's what we sing to our wives on Friday night. It's taken from Proverbs. Normally do Shabbos songs on Friday. But since we're continuing to talk about Shabbos and Kiddish and Havdala, it seemed appropriate. Let's light up the darkness. All right, who is with us as we do a little beautiful learning on a Sunday night? Yehudit saying Erev Tov, Nina and Sal and all from Florence, South Carolina. James in Indy, Melissa in Great Neck, Stephen in New Hampshire, Pauline in Arkansas, John in Sedona, Daisy says Shalom, Renee in Indy, Kelsa in Pasadena, Texas, Nancy in North Carolina, John in Memphis. I can't read it because it's in Arabic letters, but the person is from Pakistan. So welcome, welcome. Great to have you with us. Alan is tagging his friend Darian. Daisy is in Florida. Lucy in Minnesota. Paula wishing everyone peace. Jesse in Florida. Daisy says, beautiful music. I wish I could understand. A woman of valor, who can find? She is worth far more than rubies. Her husband trusts in her, and he never lacks. And you can see that. It's the last chapter in Proverbs. It's Proverbs 31. Sharon is in Lebanon, Debbie in Tom's River, Andrew in Northern Colorado, Lindsay in Cincinnati. Over there on the YouTube side, Gigi in British Columbia, Neil in Virginia. Welcome, everybody. Great to be with you. We are on Daf Kaf Vav, page 106. We're in chapter 10. Continuing our discussion of the first Mishnah, we are in tractate number 4 of the Talmud, Pesachim, the laws of Passover. This chapter is about the laws of the Seder itself. We are on an extended discussion of this first Mishnah, which opened by telling us that we must have 4 cups of wine at the Seder, and also that we don't eat in the afternoon before the Seder begins Passover night. And once we got into these laws of eating and interruption, we started talking about what happens when Shabbos and a festival, one comes right after the other, a festival right after Shabbos, or Shabbos right after a festival. And that then we got a little bit into the laws of Kiddish and Havdala. What happens if you forget to say Kiddish at the time of saying Kiddish, or Havdala at the time of saying Havdala? And this discussion continues. These are short pages, so normally we just do a few key concepts on each page so that we can go into depth. We can talk a little bit more about each of these ideas. And we never, especially like in Tractate Brachos, our first tractate of the Talmud, the pages were so long and dense, we could only cover a small percentage of what's on each page. But these pages, at least so far here in chapter 10 of Tractate Pesachim, are quite short. There's a lot of material there, but the page is short, and so we are reading the whole page, and we'll do that again tonight. So let's get into Daf Kuf Vav, page 106 of Tractate Pesachim. The Gemara relates that Rabbi Yaakov Bar Idi was particular with regard to a blemished pitcher. So yesterday, at the end of yesterday's page 105, we saw that if this idea that if somebody uses a cup of wine for Kiddish, or let's say he used it for the Birkat Hamazon, the grace after meals, which is recited over a cup of wine. Some people always recite the grace after meals over a cup of wine. We say grace after meals when we've had a meal. That's not actually defined by how much food we've had, but whether or not that meal includes bread. That's what makes it a meal, almost always. Today, we're actually going to encounter one little exception to that rule. But still, so nowadays, normally we just use a cup of wine to recite the grace after the meal, only when there's a minyan present, a quorum of 10. But still, there was this idea that, okay, if you used a cup of wine and you said Kiddish over it, and then you had to taste some of that wine, then you wouldn't use the same cup of wine, even though there's still wine in it, to recite Havdala, which we also say over a cup of wine. Now, if you only had one cup of wine, we saw that you could, by virtue of necessity, recite both the Birkat Hamazon and Havdalah over the same cup of wine, but you actually shouldn't taste it after that first blessing. You should arrange so you do all your blessings over that same cup of wine. The idea being, and then the question is why? Some say, well, it's because you only had one cup of wine, you drank some of it, and now you have less than the minimum measure required to say a blessing over a cup of wine. There is a minimum measure of how much wine needs to be in that cup. Others say it's like once you said a blessing over it and tasted the wine that's in that cup, it's like you've disqualified that particular cup of wine, the wine in it, from saying another Kiddish over it. You need to add new wine to the cup before you can say another blessing. Now we're learning that Rabbi Yaakov Bar Idi was particular with regard to a blemished pitcher. Now, what does that mean? Is he saying that he had a pitcher of wine and now he poured some wine into his cup, said a blessing over that cup of wine, and now he won't even take more wine from that pitcher when he needs to recite another blessing, a different kind of, these are not just blessings over wine, right? This is a blessing over the grace of meal or a blessing to say Havdalah, separating between Shabbat and the days of the week. So this is special purpose blessings that happen to be said over the cup of blessing, over a cup of wine. But we're not merely saying a blessing over wine because we're going to drink some wine, right? So in that situation where you need a cup of blessing, it sounds like Rabbi Yaakov Bar Idi, he's going to bring a new pitcher of wine just to fill one cup to recite the cup of blessing. That's what it seems like at this point in our discussion. I.e., he would not recite Kiddish or Havdalah with a pitcher from which someone had already taken a sip. A sip? Did someone take a sip right from the pitcher? Rav Idi Bar Shesha was particular with regard to a blemished cup. So that's what we saw yesterday. If you already took a sip from this cup and said a blessing over it, you won't say a blessing, use it as a cup of blessing for yet another Kiddish or another sanctification. And Mar Bar Rav Ashi was particular even with regard to a blemished barrel and would take wine for Kiddish only from a previously unopened barrel. Right? So here we have this idea that when are we using the cup of blessing? Because there's a time of joy, of festivity, right? Especially if it's making the Friday night Kiddish or the Havdalah or even the grace after meals, that this is a kind of festive atmosphere, and that's why we're bringing wine out. And if we now have another reason to be festive, these guys were particular, and they would bring a whole new pitcher of wine or even open a new barrel. Not like, a massive barrel that stands this tall, but still, like a serious container of wine. Now, what did they really mean by that? There's a note here from Rav Steinsaltz. Some commentaries explain that this is referring to someone who drank directly from the pitcher or barrel. If one simply poured a cup from the pitcher or barrel, it is not disqualified. Now, that's in some opinions, right? Some people will actually, or at least in ancient times, they would feel like, okay, it's a festive occasion, bring out a new barrel of wine. Other people are like, listen, as long as somebody didn't drink directly from the barrel, we can add more wine and create a new cup of blessing with it. And the law on that issue, if one drinks directly from a small barrel or pitcher, its wine may no longer be used for Kiddush. This halacha, this law, does not apply to a large barrel. Nevertheless, I think we can surmise safely that it is poor form to drink directly from a pitcher or from a barrel, unless you're really dying of thirst and there's no vessel that you could pour the wine into for you to drink it directly. The sages taught in a Baraisa with regard to the verse at Exodus 20, verse 7, remember the Sabbath day to sanctify it, right? Zachor es yom haShabbos lekadshoy. So that's something we say often during Shabbos. Remember the day of Shabbos. Zachor es Yom HaShabbos. Now, Zachor is remember. Yom HaShabbos, the Sabbath day. That word in between, es, The Israeli pronunciation of that would be et. It's a word that has no translation in English. It doesn't mean anything, but in Hebrew, it's grammatically necessary when you have a direct object. Zohor, right? So be one who remembers. Es Yom HaShabbos, one who remembers what? The day of Shabbos. But because you're remembering a thing, a direct object, Hebrew includes this word es. When the sages look at the Torah, they're looking for any kind of extraneous word. So even though it's grammatically necessary, because it doesn't add to the meaning of the verse, they say, well, maybe it actually does add to the meaning, and it's going to be a word that includes some other element that you wouldn't have thought to include otherwise, as we shall see. So the sages taught in a Baraisa with regard to the verse, Zachoris Yom HaShabbos lekadshoy, right? To bless it, to sanctify it. To sanctify, not to bless it, to sanctify it, to render it holy. So what does this mean? Remember it over wine. When we remember the Sabbath day, that means that we're going to honor the Sabbath day by having wine in honor of the Sabbath. So we remember it over wine through the recitation of Kiddish. Now, I have only derived that there is a mitzvah to recite Kiddish during the day, because it says Zachor es Yom HaShabbos, the day, right? The day of Shabbos. So here we're starting to make a distinction, right? In the Hebrew calendar, any 24-hour day begins at nightfall and runs 24 hours from that until the next nightfall, which ushers in the new day. But we also distinguish between Yom and Laila, right? Between day between Yom and Laila, between day and night. So Yom would indicate the daytime. So here the sage is saying, I have only derived that there is a mitzvah, a commandment, an obligation to recite Kiddush during the day, as the verse is referring to the day of Shabbos. From where do I derive that one must also recite Kiddush at night? As we've seen, the bigger and seemingly more important Kiddush is the Friday night Kiddush, which includes multiple blessings, as opposed to the Saturday morning Kiddush, the Kiddush of daytime, when really we only bless the wine and quote the law that we should remember Shabbos and abstain from doing work, etc. So from where do I derive that one must also recite Kiddush at night? Well, the verse states, Zachor es Yom HaShabbos lekadshoy. Remember the day of Shabbos to sanctify it, which indicates that one should also remember Shabbos as soon as it is sanctified. So what they're saying is, in that command to remember the Sabbath day to sanctify it, it's a little bit of wordy, right? It could have been said just sanctify the Sabbath day, but it says remember the Sabbath day to sanctify it. So it seems like there's extra meanings in there. One is that it should be done over wine, and the other is that it should be done on Friday night and Saturday. Now, the Gemara expresses surprise at this last question. From where is it derived that one must recite Kiddush at night? Is this the appropriate question? On the contrary, the essential mitzvah of Kiddush is to sanctify the day at night, as one must sanctify the beginning of the day, i.e. Friday night. There is no reason to sanctify Shabbos in the middle of the day, i.e. the next morning. You would think that if it's remember the Sabbath day to sanctify it, okay, so as soon as the Sabbath day begins, which is Friday night, that's when you sanctify it. So the question ought to be, from where do we derive that we also sanctify the Sabbath day on the day, meaning the next morning, Saturday morning? And furthermore, the continuation of the Baraisa states, from where do we derive the obligation of Kiddush at night? And the verse states, remember the day of Shabbos. The Tana, the rabbi of the Mishna, is seeking a source for Kiddush at night, and yet he cites a verse which states that we need to sanctify the Sabbath day. Right? It would seem like if he's looking for a source, if he's looking for a source, and this is it, maybe this is the one that should be telling him to sanctify it during the day. From where should we derive that we do it at night? On the other hand, if this is a good source for we say it at night, why is it also the source for we say it in the day? And the Gemara answers that this is what the Tana is saying. remember the day of Shabbat to sanctify it. It is a mitzvah to remember it over wine when it begins. That's Friday night. I have only derived the obligation to recite Kiddush at night. From where do I derive that one must also recite Kiddush during the day? Because the verse states, remember the day of Shabbos. It could have said, remember Shabbos to sanctify it, and then we would know to do it over wine and to do it Friday night. But since it also says, remember the day of Shabbos, now we know we should sanctify it during the day as well. And the Gemara asks, during the day, when one does not recite the same Kiddush as at night, what blessing does one recite? Rav Yehuda said, before the meal, one brings a cup of wine and simply recites the usual blessing over wine. Yesterday, I read to you both the Friday night Kiddush and the Saturday morning Kiddush so that we could compare them. The Friday night Kiddush includes the blessing over wine and also a blessing God for sanctifying the seventh day, and then what that means, and then blessing God again for sanctifying the seventh day. And then the Saturday morning Kiddush is a blessing over wine accompanied by a recitation of the law that it says in the Torah that on Shabbos, neither you nor anyone in your household will do work. But we don't actually bless God for sanctifying the day. So really in terms of a blessing, the only blessing that we say on Saturday morning in terms of the Saturday morning Kiddush is God who creates the fruit of the vine. And the Gemara relates that Rav Ashi happened to come to the city of Mechoza. The sages of Mechoza said to him on Shabbos day, will the master recite for us Kiddush Rabbah, the Great Kiddush? And they immediately brought him a cup of wine. Now, before we continue with this story, it's worth mentioning, who is Rav Ashi? Rav Ashi, in terms of the sages, very late. Rav Ashi and Ravina are the editors of the Talmud, right? They are the editors of the Gemara. So they're operating like near the end of the 5th century. The Talmud is basically put together. The Gemara is put together. Further layers of commentary will keep going for the next 1,500 years, right up till the present moment. But in terms of the sages of the Gemara, meaning the sages of the Talmud, as opposed to the sages of the Mishna, right? So the sages of the Mishna were operating, teaching, and learning up through about the year 200 of the Common Era, and then the Amoraim, the sages of the Talmud, take over, and they're arguing among themselves what the sages of the Mishnah were saying, what was clarified, what wasn't clarified, what needed clarification, etc. And then it was all set down as the Gemara by its editors, Rav Ashi and Ravina. So in terms of the sages that we encounter in the Talmud, this is very late, right? Very late in the operation of the sages. And so you would think that so many of the laws, especially of something that comes up every Shabbos, right? Like saying Kiddush by Friday night or Kiddush by Saturday morning, you would think that those laws had already been firmly established and promulgated throughout the Jewish world, both in Bavel, in the Babylonian Jewish community, which was within the Persian Empire, and the ever-shrinking Jewish community at that time that was in the Holy Land, in the Holy Land of Israel, which was then under Roman, not just dominion, but Roman oppression. And that's why it was so different. And that's why the Jerusalem Talmud was never quite finished. There was much more liberty to live and teach in a Jewish world in that Persian community, the Babylonian community within the Persian Empire. So here's Rav Ashi so late in that period encountering a difficulty where he himself, this great sage, goes to this other community within Bavel, right? So I'm not sure where Rav Ashi was operating, maybe in Pumbedisa, maybe in Sura, I'm not sure. But he goes to Mechoza, okay, which is another Jewish community within the Persian Empire. And they hand him the cup on Saturday morning because he's a great and illustrious visiting sage. And they say to him, please recite the Great Kiddush. And now here's a feeling I know well. And he's like, I'm not sure what the Great Kiddush is. What am I supposed to do, right? Like everyone assumes that he knows what the custom is. And he knows what all the customs are, and yet he's not sure exactly what they're talking about. Rav Ashi was unsure what they meant by the term Great Kiddush. And he wondered if the residents of Mechoza included other matters in their Kiddush. Right? He knew that all we need to say on Saturday morning is a blessing over the wine. Borei Pri Hagafen. So he thought, what is this Great Kiddush to which they refer? And he said to himself, well, since with regard to all the blessings that require a cup of wine, one first recite the blessing, Borei Pri Hagafen, right? Blessed are you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who creates the fruit of the vine. I will start with that blessing. So he recited, right? Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, Borei Pri Hagafen. Blessed are you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who creates the fruit of the vine. And there I didn't say it the way we would normally say it because I'm not saying a blessing. And so that's why I substituted Hashem, meaning the name for God's name, and Elokeinu, kind of a way of saying our God without actually saying the word our God, which is one of the names of God. So he said the blessing, who creates the fruit of the vine, and he lengthened it. He said it slowly to see if they were expecting an additional blessing. And he saw a particular elder bending over his cup and drinking. And he realized that this was the end of the so-called Great Kiddush. And he read the following verse about himself. This is a verse here that he applies to this situation from Ecclesiastes 2:14. The wise man, his eyes are in his head. What does that mean? Right? Everyone has eyes in their head. Everyone has eyes in their head. Does having eyes in your head make you wise? Yes, if you use them. Right? When you're unsure what the people around you expect from you, when you're unsure exactly what's going on in a new situation, don't come barging in going blah, 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 blah. Much better to say the minimum amount and look around to see what people are doing. Use the eyes in your head. That's what makes you wise, according to Rav Ashi. But what's also interesting about it, of course, is like we could see that even then, different communities had slightly different customs. And of course, that's still the case today. Even though the halacha, the law, is so well established, Jewish law, I mean, it's been around for over 3,000 years. So many of these questions had been debated, ad infinitum. You would think that all of Jewish law is set for all Jewish communities around the world, but nevertheless, we do have differences of custom between communities. The basic laws, of course, they're all the same, but there are nuances, there are little differences, and it's very apparent to people if you're, using a custom from another community when you're in this community. So, you want to tread lightly. You want to tread lightly when you're in a new place. And that's a good lesson, obviously, not just with respect to Jewish law and custom, but with respect to any kind of etiquette and manners and just, fitting in with people and learning from them and how they do things locally. Keep your eyes open. As stated above, the sons of Rabbi Chia say, one who did not recite Havdala at the conclusion of Shabbos may recite Havdala anytime over the course of the entire week. Now, I believe it was Sharon who said until Tuesday, right? If you miss saying Havdala on Saturday night, the blessing in which you bless God for separating between sacred and secular, the sacredness of Shabbos and the secular time of the rest of the week. If you don't say it Saturday night, you should say it Saturday night. You should say it Saturday night before you eat or drink anything. That's what we learned yesterday. But if you don't say it Saturday night because you forgot or something came up or you were, it was beyond your control, you were unable to do it for whatever reason, okay, so then say it on Sunday. And if you couldn't say it on Sunday, say it on Monday. And until when can you do it? Is it the whole week until the next Shabbos begins? Is it until Tuesday, as Sharon said to us yesterday? So the Gemara asks, and until how many days of the week have passed, may one still recite Havdala? Rabbi Zera said, until the fourth day of the week, meaning Wednesday. The fourth day is the middle day of the week. Once you reach Wednesday, you're already, instead of being after Shabbos, now you're in the days before Shabbos, meaning the days before the next Shabbos. So Sharon had it exactly right. Up until the end of Tuesday afternoon, you can still say Havdala if you forgot to say it Saturday night. But once it becomes Tuesday night, that's already Wednesday, right? Since days in the Hebrew calendar always begin the night before. So once it's Tuesday night, you're already part of Wednesday. You can no longer recite Havdala. That's the limit. Then this is like that ruling of halacha stated when Rabbi Zera sat before Rav Ashi. And some say it was Rav Ashi who sat before Rabbi Yochanan. And he sat and said, with regard to the wording of bills of divorce, right? So a get, we're talking about a get. So when you have a divorce by Jewish law, so the husband has to give the wife a get, right? And then after that document changes hands and he issues it and she receives it, then according to Jewish law, they are divorced. He also has certain obligations toward her. That was a big innovation. That in the case of a divorce, he would owe her money. Prior to that, women lived in such a patriarchal world that, husbands could drop their wives with no obligations to them. It was a horrible situation. It wasn't that it was so much better, but it was, from zero to something is a pretty big difference. So with regard to bills of divorce, Rabbi Zera, and he said, with regard to the wording of bills of divorce, the first day of the week and the second and third days of the week are called after Shabbos. If a bill of divorce or a condition upon which the document depends include the phrase after Shabbos, right? In other words, if she accepts this document after Shabbos, then our divorce is binding. If there was a condition in it like that, so it would need to be delivered by the end of Tuesday afternoon, and it would be considered after Shabbos. However, the fourth and fifth days of the week and the eve of Shabbos, meaning the fourth, fifth, and sixth days of the week, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, are called before Shabbos. Likewise, with regard to Havdala, the first 3 days of the week are considered the time period after Shabbos, and therefore one may still recite Havdala on these days. Rabbi Yaakov Bar Idi said, however, one who recites Havdala during this time period may not recite the blessing over fire. This blessing may be recited only at the conclusion of Shabbos at the time when fire was originally created. So, when we say Havdala, we make a blessing over wine, and we don't drink it yet. And then we make a blessing over spice and a blessing over the light, the flame of the Havdala candle. Then we recite the Havdala blessing itself, blessing God for separating between sacred and secular. And then we repeat, blessing God. Then we list a few distinctions, right? 3 distinctions, some say 4. Of things that God distinguishes between day and night, between Israel and the nations, between sacred and secular. Blessed is God who distinguishes between sacred and secular. And then we drink the wine that we blessed with the first blessing. If we don't say Havdala on Saturday night because we forgot or we were prevented, we can still say the Havdala blessing on Sunday or Monday or Tuesday. But if we say it late, we only recite it over wine, and then we say the Havdala blessing. We don't say the blessings over the spice or the fire. The fire, because, why? When was fire created? After Shabbos, right? What happened? The first 6 days of creation, on the 6th day, the humans were created. It took them no time at all to make a transgression. They ate of the fruit of the tree, the knowledge of good and evil. There was only one rule that they weren't supposed to break. They broke that rule, and God said, your punishment is that you're going to be banished from the Garden of Eden. You're going to have to go out into the regular world, and by the sweat of your brow you shall eat your bread. God was merciful and allowed them to spend one Shabbos in the Garden of Eden before they were ejected. When they were ejected, at the conclusion of Shabbos, they were also, because of God's mercy, given a little gift that would make the loss of the Garden of Eden more bearable. And that was fire. So fire was given to humanity after the seventh day, at the conclusion of the first Shabbos. And that's why we make a blessing over the lights of fire, over the Havdala candle. But if we don't make the Havdala blessing on Saturday night, we can still do it, but we do it without the blessing over fire, and then the blessing over spice goes along with that. Rav Baruna said that Rav said, one who washes his hands should not recite Kiddush after washing, as this would constitute an interruption between washing and eating. So we were just talking about Havdalah. Now we're going back to the Friday night meal. Right? So the Friday night meal, what do we normally do? We normally would make Kiddush over the wine and sanctify the day of Shabbos. Then we go wash our hands, come back, and before we speak again, we make a motzi, a blessing over the bread, and then eat the bread, and then we can enjoy our Shabbos meal. But one who washes his hands before saying Kiddush, if somebody washes their hands early, before they've said Kiddush, then what? One who washes his hands should not recite Kiddush after washing. Now, this is the statement of Rav Baruna, who said it in the name of Rav. Right? That one who washes his hands should not recite Kiddush after washing, as this would constitute an interruption between washing and eating. And he will have to wash again. Instead, he should hear Kiddush from someone else. Rav Yitzhak bar Shmuel bar Marta said to them, not a lot of time has yet passed since Rav died, and we have already forgotten his halachic rulings. Right? So this is how you see, even among sages whose business it was to hear teachings in the oral tradition and memorize them perfectly, and they were just so trained at memorizing. Nevertheless, because there were so many of them and they were arguing about so many different rulings, thousands of rulings, okay, so things would get a little bit confused, a little bit lost in, in this sort of telephone chain, right? When you played that game when you were a kid, you whisper a message to the guy next to you, he whispers a message to the next one, to the next one, to the next one. By the time the message gets around the room, how often does it really resemble the original message? Little word changes end up changing the meanings. So this is a law being cited in the name of Rav, but now, according to Rav Yitzhak bar Shmuel, bar Marta, he says, Rav only died a little while ago and you're already teaching this completely wrong in his name. Many times, says Rav Yitzhak bar Shmuel, the son of Marta, many times I stood before Rav and saw that sometimes he preferred bread and would recite Kiddush over bread. And on those occasions, Rav would wash his hands, recite Kiddush over the bread, and eat it. And at other times, he preferred wine and would recite Kiddush over wine. Now, this shows that Kiddush is not considered an interruption between washing one's hands and eating bread. Now, it is possible to say Kiddush over bread. Let's read the law on this. One who washes his hands before Kiddush demonstrates that he prefers bread to wine. Consequently, one who does so should recite Kiddush over bread. Based on the Rosh and Mordechai, the Rima rules that it is preferable to wash one's hands before Kiddush and then to recite Kiddush over wine. Several later authorities write that one should act in accordance with the first opinion. Nevertheless, the opinion of the Rima is accepted by certain communities. So you can, but far and away, the most common practice throughout the Jewish world is that you say Kiddush over wine, then you wash your hands, then you eat bread. But if you don't have any wine, you could say Kiddush over bread. You could do that. Rav Huna said, one who has tasted any food on Shabbat night, meaning Friday night, may not recite Kiddush anymore that night, as one must recite Kiddush before he eats. Instead, he recites Kiddush during the day before the meal. Rav Chana bar Chenana raised a dilemma before Rav Huna. If one tasted food at the conclusion of Shabbos before reciting Havdala, what is the halacha with regard to whether he may recite Havdala? And he said to him, I say that one who has tasted food may still recite Havdala, And Rav Ashi said, one who has tasted food may not recite Havdala. Right? So we've seen that if you forgot to say Havdala, or you just were prevented from it, and you ate food Saturday night, okay, so you can still say Havdala. That is the law, and it's repeated again here. One who has tasted may recite Havdala. One who ate before reciting Havdala after Shabbat may still recite Havdala. But it is not the ideal way to do so. So if there's two people there and one already ate food and the other one didn't, let the one who didn't eat food already, let him be the one to recite Havdala, and the other one, the one who already ate, can say Amen to him and be included in the Havdala, but it doesn't necessarily have to be the one who does the reciting. And the Gemara relates that Rav Yirmiyah bar Abba happened to come to the house of Rav Ashi, and he forgot and tasted some food after Shabbat before Havdala. They gave him a cup, and he recited Havdala. Later, Rav Ashi's wife said to her husband, "But my master does not act this way. In your opinion, one who eats before Havdala does not recite Havdala." He said to her, leave Rav Yirmiyah bar Abba alone. He maintains in accordance with the opinion of his rabbi. Rav Yirmiyah bar Abba was a student of Rav, who ruled that even one who has eaten may recite Havdala. And so once again, we see that at the time of the sages, as today, there were differences in local customs and also differences depending on who's your rabbi. Which community were you following? Which stream of the oral tradition were you participating in? And now I'm almost done, so if you have a question, get it in there. Rav Yosef said that Shmuel said, one who has tasted food before Kiddish may not recite Kiddish. And one who has tasted food before Havdala may not recite Havdala. And Rabbah said that Rav Nachman said that Shmuel said, one who has tasted may nevertheless recite Kiddush, and one who has tasted may likewise recite Havdala. So we've heard already the law with regard to Havdala. One who has tasted may recite Kiddush. One who accidentally ate before Kiddush on Shabbos night may nevertheless recite Kiddush that night. Note the wording, one who accidentally ate before Kiddush. So yes, if you ate during Friday night after it's already nightfall and before Kiddush, you shouldn't have done that. But if you did, you can still be the one who says Kiddush. However, ab initio, you should avoid that situation. Once nightfall comes, don't eat until you've recited or at least heard Kiddush. Okay, that's what I've got for us. And then I'll just add on the reasoning of one who eats after it's nightfall on Friday night and before hearing Kiddush. The Ra'avad asks, just because someone has committed a transgression by eating before Kiddush, should he be told to continue transgressing by not reciting Kiddush at all? Or as the sages put it, if someone has eaten garlic and his breath smells, should he then eat more garlic? One explanation is that this person should not recite Kiddush himself, as it appears as though he is denigrating the mitzvah by not fulfilling it at the appropriate time. Rather, let someone else recite Kiddush for him. All right, that's what I've got for us this evening. Let me go to your questions and comments. Sharon. But on Friday night, we begin with Vahi Erev, Vahi Boker. There was evening and there was morning. So isn't this an indication that it is said at night? Definitely. And that is the correct way to do it. And so I'm sure you wrote that question before we discuss further on in the day. The correct way is to say the Friday night Kiddush on Friday night. If you forgot to say it on Friday night and you end up saying the Friday night Kiddush on Saturday, so then you don't say Vahi Erev, Vahi Boker. You don't say there was evening and there was morning. You leave that part out of it and you would just start with the blessing over the wine. Neil, quote, he said to himself, is that Rav Ashi? Is this an autobiographical account in the Talmud? Right, so Ravina and Rav Ashi are the editors of it, but when they're referring to themselves, remember, they're the editors. It's not like they're, novelists. So these are oral teachings that are being passed down from teacher to student, some of which were authoritative enough to be set down in writing. But the way other people were transmitting them, they weren't saying I Rav Ashi. They were saying Rav Ashi said, or Ravina said. And so even when they set it down as the editors of the Gemara, they used that same language. They didn't refer to themselves, in the first person. But however, we do have, right? We saw it today. The Gemara answers that this is what the Tana is saying. Remember the Shabbos day to sanctify it. Remember it over the wine when it begins. From this, I have only derived the obligation to. I have only derived. Who's this I? Right? Who is this I have only derived? And, so again, it is a kind of like taking a stylistic flourish a little bit, right? Who is it? The Tana who's speaking? Are they saying, okay, the one who transmitted this teaching, he must be saying, from this I have only derived. From where do I derive? It could have been worded as the one who is transmitting this teaching, he derived from this and could ask from where do we derive, etc. So, they're going to be a little loose with the pronoun, not loose, but there's no absolute consistency of what is the voice of the Talmud, or, whose voice are we speaking in, or what pronouns are going to be used. There's going to be a lot of variety because there were so many oral teachings being transmitted, not only sort of vertically, within the community in Bavel and within the community in Israel, but then there was that cross-pollination, people like Ula bringing teachings from the community in Israel to the community in Bavel and vice versa. So, there's going to, we're going to encounter inconsistencies of style in the Talmud all the time. Yosef, wine is obviously very important, but what if someone cannot drink wine? Is grape juice or a non-alcoholic replacement kosher for festivals? 100%. Anytime that you have to do something over wine, you can use grape juice, because what it says is the fruit of the vine. And there are many people who will substitute grape juice for wine because for one reason or another they don't want to drink alcohol. They're in a context where it's inappropriate to serve alcohol, or they're doing it for the children. I mean, happens all the time. So grape juice, as long as it's kosher grape juice, 100% can be substituted for kosher wine. And finally, PK Sakara asking just the right question. Why is wine so important? So I don't have a ready answer for you. Maybe someone can fill one in. Like, why is it that when we say, remember the Sabbath day to sanctify it, that says to the sages, make it over wine, right? I mean, wine was definitely considered important. The grape is one of those 7 species that characterize the beauty and abundance of the Holy Land. But so are dates, and they drank date beer. Why is grape wine considered so much superior to date beer? Wine is stronger than beer, and so there's this idea that when wine comes in, secrets come out in a good way, right? That we have insight that we wouldn't have had otherwise without the alcohol of wine. The wine that they drank in ancient times was much stronger than modern wine. They actually had to dilute it 4-1 just so that it would have the approximate same strength as the wine that we drink today. So I don't have a good, dispositive answer for you. But one beautiful answer that I've heard about Friday night is that we make 2 important blessings over wine and bread, right? And wine, the older it gets, the better it is. Obviously up to a limit, but essentially the older wine gets, the more complex and smooth and beautiful and good tasting it is. And with bread, the fresher it is, the newer it is. Generally speaking, the better that it is. And so between wine, that the older it gets, the better it is, which represents our elders, and bread, that the fresher and newer it is, the better it is, which represents our children, right? So then we cover all of the generations and all elements of God's world, both the things that are ancient and eternal and the things that are fresh and ever new. It covers all of the creation and all of the gifts that the Lord has bestowed on us. That's what I've got for us tonight. We should all be blessed with abundance, with health, with prosperity, with beauty in our lives. Hold on, Nina's sending me an answer from Betzalel ben Avraham. The world was corrupted with the grape, and the world will be corrected with the grape according to Kabbalah. Okay, so according to Jewish mysticism, when did wine come into the world? With Noah, right? So Noah was considered a righteous man in his generation, the only righteous man in his generation. So when God wiped out all of humanity in the flood, but saved Noah and his family, okay? Reset, new start with a righteous person, and now we'll have a righteous human population that will emit from Noah and his family. But as soon as Noah got off the ark, he planted the first vineyard, made wine, got drunk, and had an embarrassing episode, right? And from there, alcohol came into the world and caused all the problems that alcohol has caused. So it's almost like it's a great reminder to us at our Shabbos table that this liquid, this alcohol, that it can be used for such great beauty, and it can be corrupted for such devastating harm. And in this context, at our Shabbos table, we're not going to, just get sloppy drunk and be ridiculous. Of course, we'll use it in a proper way. And we should associate alcohol with faith and an aspiration to rise higher in our lives, to use it properly and to not abuse it, right? So alcohol corrupted the world, and with alcohol, we will elevate the world. Beautiful teaching. Thank you, Betzalel ben Avraham. Okay, my friends. Have a great night, and with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Monday night, 6 p.m. Pacific, the regular time. All the best.